Previously on Autistic Critic, Gigange is dead last. Exit stage right, Charming. You will receive no standing ovation tonight.
Love you too, Rando!
I enjoy Jeff Goldblum, but the villain of Boss Baby 2 is probably one of his obscure roles. I'll get to his predecessor soon. For the purposes of this list, we have to include Spirit Untamed since it was in theaters, despite being based on a Netflix kids show. So our villain is a wrangler named Hendricks. In his first scene, he saves a girl named Lucky from tripping over a caboose railing as she's admiring a herd of horses. Well, I guess he's okay for now. And then 2 minutes later, the movie establishes he leads a gang of wanted crooks. Guess that makes him a twist villain. He abuses a horse who's supposed to be Spirit. 3 girls rescue the horse, and he and a posse of wranglers spend the movie chasing them trying to capture it, so they can sell multiple horses on the black market for a fortune. It's crazy how these guys are bent on catching these girls' horses when there are plenty of them in the fields. In terms of compliments, Walton Goggins put on a pretty good Western accent. I laughed when he told Lucky, "Come and get me," only to realize he would be headbutted by Spirit off a boat at the last second. He's not the worst, but he's as generic as they come for a villain in a horse girl movie. Frankly, I don't have much else to say except this. DreamWorks, stop trying to make theatrical movies based on your Netflix shows happen! It's not going to happen!
You're a poacher!
Yes, I'm a poacher.
Oh boy, here comes another twist villain! It's Kari from The Incredibles if she became Charles Muntz. In Abominable, Dr. Zara is working for a businessman who seems to be the movie's villain, but it later turns out he has a soft spot for animals. If I had a nickel for every time Eddie Izzard voiced an animated businessman who collected animals in 2019, I'd have 2 nickels, which isn't a lot, but it's weird to happen twice, right? Something was in the snow that year. The scientist seems calm around the short-tempered Snurs, but she goes off the rails post-reveal. She's willing to recklessly drive across snowy mountains to catch this Yeti. That's probably a bad idea since it could cause avalanches that would push her off a cliff and yeah. That's exactly what I expected to happen. Speaking of expecting things, I went into this movie knowing the twist beforehand, just so I wouldn't end up reviewing the wrong character and redoing all my notes. But honestly, I didn't get anything out of her as a twist villain. Dare I say it? She is just a villain that exists.
I'm the goddess of chaos!
Now we've come to the final 2D animated DreamWorks villain. Chronologically, that is, not when it comes to the ranking order. Eris is animated very fluidly. I can't say I've seen anything like it. However, that can get a bit extreme. I thought it was neat how she created a disguise when enacting her plan. Michelle Pfeiffer does a really good job voice acting. So anyway, now for why she's basic. Eris is a goddess of chaos who wants to plunge the world into discord, so she steals a treasure with unexplained mystic powers called the Book of Peace and frames Sinbad for it. Afterwards, though, she gets pretty uncreative with her tactics. Once the framing step of her scheme is complete, she sits back and sends monsters after Sinbad as he's sailing towards Tartarus to return the Book of Peace to Syracuse. I should mention that Sinbad's friend Proteus volunteered to take the death sentence, so Sinbad wants to save him and clear his name. Without an heir to Syracuse's throne, there'd be chaos. Eris's plan makes sense, but her monster attacks eventually start to get repetitive. At one point, she even does it while taking a cosmic bubble bath. She also makes a deal with Sinbad to confess if he will take the sentence intended for him, and gods are bound by promises. Then Sinbad saves the day, and she leaves to cause problems elsewhere. Almost 20 years later, DreamWorks would make another villain who is a force of nature and gets upset when a hero accepts their fate before leaving in peace. They nailed it on their second attempt. Their first shot, however, was just kind of okay. I'm gonna move on now. Like her. The Wild Robot is a great movie, but Vontra highlights one issue I have with it. A lack of focus on the robot side of the plot. While I cared about Roz and Brightbuilt, I kept wondering, what is a Rosm? What year is it? What does Roz's company do? Is this a quiet dystopia or something? Has robotic assistants made humans complacent like WALL-E? Can't the company just build new robots to replace the ones they lost in the typhoon? When Vontra shows up in the last 10 to 20 minutes, those questions burn even more. Yeah, it's great when more robots come in, but at this point, the movie is almost over. The voice of this character has gleeful intonations despite being unfeeling. Stephanie Shu sounds like she's having a blast despite her limited time in the movie. Apparently, she played Karen in the SpongeBob musical. That's cool. And to Vontra's credit, she does put the animals in danger while pursuing Roz. She technically succeeds in her mission because Roz ultimately chooses refuses to return to universal dynamics, but we don't know her world. Therefore, I can't give Vontra more brownie points. Her most evil action is burning a forest. Meanwhile, other DreamWorks villains will banish, enslave, and/or slaughter massive groups of people while constantly driving the narrative. I'll put Vontra this high up out of goodwill for being a better villain than ones I have significant problems with, but at least those guys gave me a lot more to work with. She won't rank any higher though, because it's time to talk about characters whose actions leave a bigger impact on their movies.
Are you a god?
Tzekel-Kan is a weird one for me. The Road to El Dorado is a saucy movie, but this guy has some major weaknesses in terms of surfacing his story. He's a traditionalist high priest who, like the rest of El Dorado, thinks Tulio and Miguel are gods. As a side effect, he doesn't accomplish anything for the majority of the movie. He's making sure El Dorado's deities receive sacrifices, only for Tulio and Miguel to veto them at every turn, either for their own convenience or to spare the people's lives. Once he figures out they've been conning him, he summons a gigantic rock jaguar to kill them, which could have made a pretty cool climax, since the movie actually has 2 climaxes. At the end, Tzekel-Kan runs into Hernan Cortez and his conquistadors, offering to lead them to El Dorado. Once Miguel, Tulio, and Chell block the city's entrance, Cortez deems him a liar and enslaves him. All in all, this character looks cool, but I needed more from him.
Building a rocket or fighting a...
I suppose Boss Baby Villain number 1 is better than Boss Baby Villain number 2. Francis doesn't have a lot of screen time over the course of this movie. He first appears in a clip from the slideshow the Boss Baby is showing to his team at the 21-minute mark. Then he doesn't properly appear until 48 minutes into the movie when there's only 49 minutes left in the runtime. I was ready to consider the twist with this character an afterthought, but the more I thought about it, the more I realized it makes sense within the plot's logic, or lack thereof. As a sucker for this type of trope, I think it's a great idea to have the hero and the villain's experiences with being replaced contrast with each other. Tim doesn't like that the Boss Baby hogs his parents' attention, but as the two get along so they can get what they want, Tim learns to love his brother. Meanwhile, Francis used to be a super colossal big fat Boss Baby, a major executive at BabyCorp. Then the company fired him on account of his lactose intolerance causing him to age, so he became bitter and resentful of babies. I like how he presents his backstory using a pop-up book. The format and cinematography is incredibly captivating. I found it funny when the pages folded out so much that he couldn't close the book and threw it into a fireplace. Plus, Steve Buscemi's always delightfully slimy deliveries really shine. Okay, so I've given Francis compliments. You might be wondering, how is he this low? While there's a through line to his actions, his logic can be a little all over the place. His plan is to launch non-aging puppies all over the world, to the point where they'll be so loved, BabyCorp will go out of business. In other words, with these puppies, we won't need babies. If that happens, the human race would be doomed to eventual extinction. He threatens to kill Tim's parents if Tim and Boss Baby try to stop him, but of course they're gonna try. What does he even have to gain from killing 2 of his own employees? During his monologue in the climax, he's like,
You could have had your parents' love all to yourself again, but no, you blew it. You let that baby boss you around!
That's not how BabyCorp spy missions work. The boys will be a family for good if Boss Baby fails his mission, and Francis knows this because he used to work at BabyCorp. I've heard people say, how does he remember his past life if you forget BabyCorp once you lose your pacifier? But it's not a plot hole. He hoarded it for years. It's a really delightful expression of how he refuses to move forward. At the end, he gets turned into a baby by falling into a vat of BabyCorp formula. Hey, that shouldn't have worked because he's lactose intolerant. Anyway, it's a freaky comeuppance, but I'm sure his big brother Eugene will lead the baby to grow into a much better person now that he's entered his 2nd infancy.
I'm having fish tonight!
It's hard to think of a more complicated DreamWorks antagonist than Don Lino. He wants his younger son Lenny to conform to shark behavior, while his eldest, Frankie, lives up to it. He's a mob boss, but from his perspective, Oscar is a villain. When Frankie is killed by a random anchor, Oscar takes credit for the kill, and the sharks don't know he lied. Lino's anger makes complete sense. He's grieving a son and wants to take out his killer. Robert De Niro sounds like he's having a blast voice acting. The way he delivers his lines cracks me up, even when the lines aren't funny.
You don't tell me shut up, I tell you shut up! Get off the phone! They're gonna tear you fin from fin!
I also can't get the way he says,
Are you kidding me? Are you out of your mind?
out of my mind. It's the perfect midpoint between a character being deeply disappointed and a laugh moment for the audience. Unfortunately, he doesn't have a compelling dynamic with Oscar because he meets him in the climax of Shark Tale. This fact undermines the weight of their interaction. When Oscar says, "This is between you and me," Lino retorts,
What did I ever do to you?
"Hello? You eat fish, dude!" It's nice to get a villainous redemption, but it doesn't really stick with me at the end of the day. Kinda feels more like a formality than anything. In spite of his controlling and predatory tendencies, he's too enjoyable to rank any lower. Anyway, when it comes to Lino, I just told you what's what!
What's the matter, Colonel?
What a funny coincidence. The villains from Spirit and Boss Baby are marginally better than the ones from their follow-ups released in 2021. Ain't that quack and crazy, Jimbo? The Colonel from Spirit is a pretty functional villain who becomes a deeper character based on one non-antagonistic choice he makes, which we'll get to. He tries to break and tame this unruly horse for his military through many means, such as starving and dehydrating him. However, Spirit escapes with the help of a Lakota warrior named Little Creek, but Professor Callahan won't rest until he catches this horse. Then we get to the climax where Spirit and Little Creek jump across a gorge to freedom. The Colonel is so impressed by Spirit's resolve and strength that he quietly calls off his chase and nods in respect. I gotta give him credit. Instead of giving into his obsession fervor and endangering his men, he understood Spirit earned his triumph and moved on. It's such a profound way for a DreamWorks antagonist to go out, but I'd be lying if I said there weren't many villains moving forward that stood out to me more.
I will be king.
Here we have our first Madagascar villain, the Alec Baldwin lion. The opening is so unsubtle in laying out this guy's deal, it's funny, and it's clearly meant to be.
I'm better looking, I have better hair, I'm deceivingly smart, and I want everyone else to do what I say.
He's basically Scar again.
Life's not fair. Life's not fair.
He wants to overthrow Alex's dad and be in charge of everything. He's not particularly competent after he gains control of the savannah. He just doesn't know what to do once the water dries up. I like the part where Nana beats him up. I don't have much else to say. I've got to move it. I've got to move it.
Wow, you're like a kitty cat.
Now we've reached the most recent DreamWorks villain, Kitty Cat, from Bad Guys 2. This snow leopard has a rad design. From her buff build, to her clothing, to her weird neon ring around her right pupil, you feel like she could punch you at any given moment. This is Daniel Brooks' most memorable film performance since a Minecraft movie. I should know because she's like a ninja in terms of filmography. Every time I feel like I've never heard of her, it turns out she's been in something I've seen. Kitty isn't the most fleshed out character there is. She prioritizes style over substance. Her deal is that she looked up to the bad guys when they were, you know, criminals, and she hopes to be respected as a villain, when in actuality, people would fear her. She doesn't care about the safety of the other bad girls, who ultimately realize this and turn on her. You hate her when she reveals to the internet that Diane Foxington was the Crimson Paw. At times, she can feel like the gender swap of a certain other villainous snow leopard whose downfall was hubris. With that said, she's so brutal her shortcomings don't even matter. Overall, she's a villain you genuinely hate for doing unlikable evil things, and that's good. She will never be good, and that's not bad.
I will rule the world!
I know this is gonna be a tough pill for my cousin to swallow. Sorry, bud, but here goes. The villain of How to Train Your Dragon 2 is a one-armed, one-dimensional Jason Momoa who let himself go. It's hard to think of a more mixed bag of a villain than Drago Bludvist. He's a madman, but that doesn't compensate for a lack of depth. It's because of this movie that I know men who kill without reason cannot be reasoned with. There's so much build-up through him being the subject of so many characters' conversations, but I feel like that does the heavy lifting in making us fearful of him. He serves his role as a threat decently well. That flashback to when Stoic met Drago and all the chiefs laughed and paid for it with their lives except him is enough to sway me to listen to Stoic. And above all, he gets points for inciting one of the most twisted kills I've seen in all of fiction.
I'm in danger!
Even though Jaimon Hansu's voice bellows with hoarseness, he doesn't have many memorable lines of dialogue outside of "I alone control the dragons." His very next movie was Guardians of the Galaxy, so I see this as an absolute win. But you know what? I am tolerant of different opinions. I felt bad placing Wiggle Time and Cold Spaghetti Western in the lower half of my Wiggles ranking after finding out they have a ton of fans. I was hoping to love those specials, but had trouble meeting them at their level. I'm extending that same sympathy to fans of the Red Death and Drago. If you want to make your own video essay defending any content or character I didn't rank too high, and I think it's effective, I'll gladly promote it. In the meantime, I don't find Drago to be an amazing villain personally. Fortunately, there's one How to Train Your Dragon villain who blows Drago out of the water, and we'll get to him.